Hello and shalom from Jerusalem. This is David Parsons, one of the vice presidents here at the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, and our senior international spokesman. We're coming to you from the ICEJ headquarters in the Israeli capital. And we've got a very, very important show today for our ICEJ weekly webinar. We're talking about the ongoing visit of US President Joe Biden to Israel and the Middle East. And we're so pleased to have Professor Eytan Gilboa with us. He's one of Israel's leading experts on US-Israel relations, US policy towards the Middle East. And we're just very pleased to have him. Let me just make a program note. If you're over on the ICEJ's YouTube channel, or on our Facebook Live platform right now, and you want to come over to the webinar to get translation. We currently have translation in Portuguese, Spanish, and Thai. We may have French or another language join us soon, but you can get translation there. And otherwise, we want to get started. We have Professor Gilboa for about the next half hour. And just to try and make this as brief an introduction as I can, but he has quite the resume. Eytan Gilboa is one of Israel's leading academics on US-Israel relations. He studied, was magna cum laude at Hebrew University, and then earned a master's and a doctorate at Harvard. He's been professor of international communications at Bar-Ilan University for many years, where he founded the Israel Public Diplomacy Forum. He also served as a scholar with BESA, the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. He's now with the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic and Strategy and Security, many other hats that he wears, but he's published more than a dozen books on the Middle East and lectured at numerous universities, Hebrew U, Harvard, UCLA, Georgetown, American University in DC, Tufts University, University of Hamburg, and currently he's lecturing at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, from where he is joining us now early in the morning. It's great to have you, Professor Gilboa.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yes. Now you're watching events unfold as Biden arrived yesterday and has been going through various meetings, events, a 4-day visit after Israel go to Saudi Arabia. But you've had a long, you've been involved in this in your career for many, many years. And, sometimes it takes a few months before you can really discern where an administration, an American administration's policies, approach to Israel and the Middle East are going. We've had 18 months now as Biden arrives. You get a good picture of what he's trying to do. And many expected him to completely undo whatever Trump did and go back to, say, some of the Obama era policies of appeasing Iran, bullying Israel to Palestinian statehood. Where do you see him going? Where's his course now, 18 months in his first official visit here?
The most important part of this trip is to establish a regional defense system in the Middle East against Iran. So Iran, number one issue, it has been for a long time. And the talks today between Biden and the Prime Minister, the signing of the Jerusalem Declaration, and also a Zoom talk with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates and India are quite significant. The visit in Israel is designed to continue the Abraham Accords. So in this particular area, Biden continues Trump's policy on creating and supporting a defense system in the Middle East. there is much agreement between Israel and the United States, and maybe most of the countries in the world, that Iran should not become a nuclear power. The debate is on the proper means to achieve that goal. And here there is some disagreement between the two countries. Biden thinks that return to the 2015 deal and diplomacy would do it. Israel thinks it's too late and it would not be effective in preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear state. And therefore, Israel suggests that the way to do it is to stop negotiations. These negotiations have not been successful from the beginning. Iran dictated the terms of the negotiations. You don't deal with a terrorist state. Ibrahim Raisi, the president of Iran, is a killer, is a murderer. He murdered many political prisoners, and he should have been outcast from the international community altogether. So the idea is, Israel says, you need to stop negotiations, you need to impose harsher sanctions, and you have to come up with a credible military option, because without it, Iran would be racing to the bomb.
Yeah, now that's the message of the caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid to him today. And how much is there a consensus among Israeli political and military leaders concerning where Iran is in the process and whether an agreement versus this credible military threat? Because there were reports that some intelligence members of the intelligence community here in Israel were saying, an agreement might be better.
Yes, but they are in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not just Israel. Obama said during his term that only Prime Minister Netanyahu opposed the deal. This was not true. Both during his years and now, the entire Sunni Arab world, all the Sunni Arab countries, as well as Israel, are threatened by Iran, are fearful of Iran, and have told the United States numerous times that this is a major threat that has to be dealt with, that has to be contained. So there is much consensus in not only in Israel, but also in the entire Middle East. And this is the main reason for the strategic conference that will take place in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in a few days. Biden will meet leaders of 9 Arab countries. And the number one issue is going to be this defense alliance that the countries of the Middle East want to accomplish. And in the first stage, the idea is what we call an air defense system, which is designed to block Iranian rockets coming from Yemen by their protege proxy Houthis, a Shiite group in Yemen. And so rockets, drones, and cyber attacks. This is the first thing. But it seems also that Saudi Arabia will upgrade relations with Israel, not yet full normalization, but everybody in the Middle East knows that without Saudi approval, there would have been no Abraham Accords. Bahrain and United Arab Emirates would have not signed those agreements with Israel. But now the main progress, the main addition to the Abraham Accords is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will not do it fast. It will take much time and effort to get normalization with Saudi Arabia. But I think the first steps will be established during this visit. 2 things. Number one, Saudi Arabia will allow passenger planes to go from Israel to Asia over the airspace, the Saudi airspace, Number two, Saudi Arabia will allow charter flights to go directly for Arabs, for Israeli Arabs who want to go to Mecca, direct flights. This never happened. Also, I need to say that Biden himself will travel from Israel to Saudi Arabia direct. Never happened before. So we see some signs of improvement in Saudi-Israel relations. And obviously, Saudi membership in that defense alliance is very important and very critical, because Saudi Arabia is one of the most richest and the most powerful states in the entire region.
Are you surprised that Biden has embraced the Abraham Accords and decided to help build upon the momentum, even though they're so identified with Trump?
Well, I have to tell you that at the beginning of Biden's administration, many of us were not sure what his approach to the Abraham Accords would be, mainly because of the criticism coming from the so-called progressive branch of his party. I've been following them. They have no idea what they are talking about. In one sense, they were talking about Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, about his role in the murder of the U.S. Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and they were complaining about human rights violations. They talked about all the countries in the Gulf as dictatorships of a sort. But Biden is going to Saudi Arabia, to Canassa, because he severely criticized Mohammed bin Salman. We call him MBS, and completely alienated him, didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to invite him to Washington. So what happened? The war in Ukraine happened. And the sanctions the United States and the West imposed on Russia increased the price of oil. Biden needs Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf countries to increase oil. So Saudi Arabia said, well, if this is the case, you have to reconcile with us. You have to come to visit us, and we have to repair relations and see where morality is. So moral values in international relations are important, but strategic goals are much more important. So if you just limit yourself to be a nice guy in the jungle that we live in today, this would not take you far enough.
Do you think another fallout from the Ukraine war, for me, the big lesson there is that a despot or authoritarian regime, if it is allowed to operate under a credible nuclear umbrella, it can do a lot of damage with conventional weapons, and NATO doesn't want to engage in that direct conflict and trigger a nuclear exchange. And if Iran, do you think the Biden team has realized if Iran were to get nuclear weapons, they could do a lot more damage and mischief in this region than they've been even doing before?
Yes, yes, obviously, and I think you are quite right. I think that the war in Ukraine is affecting almost everything in world affairs. There are many lessons to be learned, especially you don't trust dictators. I think the West made a huge mistake by trusting Putin and trading with him to the point where Germany was 50% dependent on Russian oil and gas. And they were very surprised to see him take the Crimea Peninsula back in 2014, and even more surprised when he decided a few months ago to invade and occupy parts of Ukraine. But I want to emphasize something that is very important, and that is we are witnessing the emergence of two major strategic axes in the region. The one is the good guys. It's Israel, the Sunni Arab countries, and the United States. Not yet the European Union and NATO. They are still slipping. But there is another emerging axis. This is the bad guys. And you may call them the axis of evil. And they include Iran, Russia, and China. Putin is going to be next week in Tehran. He is going to buy drones, like attack drones from Iran. So Iran is participating in the war in Ukraine, helping Russia. China, a few months ago, signed a strategic agreement with Iran for 25 years. This was just back in March 2022. So, and this agreement allows China to deploy 5,000 security people inside Iran, and also to share intelligence and perhaps even develop together some military equipment. So, from the US perspective, if China is the #1 threat to American influence in the world, then Iran, this axis where Iran plays a major role, it becomes even more significant. And so the strategic alliance to be ushered in a few days is designed against Iran, but also against China and Russia, and this is directly connected to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, we know Iran has this expanding arsenal of different kinds of drones. I saw reports that a lot of the parts come from China and they're put together in Iran, and Russia, rather than get them straight from China, Iran's the middleman. But you mentioned the good guys alliance and the bad guys axis. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is going to show up in Tehran also to meet with Putin and with the president of Iran. Is he a good guy or a bad guy?
He's in the middle.
Yeah,
he's in the middle. He has been a bad guy because of the Islamic dictatorship that he moved Turkey into. But he's there because there is some dispute between Turkey and Syria on a piece of territory in northern Syria, which Russia can help him to either influence there, or to have more influence there, or even to annex it. Turkey for many years wanted to get back that area in northern Syria. So this is the reason he is there. He is not, since he provides Ukraine with attack drones. There's a whole factory in Ukraine that produces Turkish attack drones. So this is really funny, because Iran will supply Russia and Turkey is supplying drones to Ukraine. I don't consider Erdogan to be like a full member of that bad guys axis. It's more China, Russia, and Iran. And but he is playing his games even with Israel. So it's difficult to trust him.
Yeah, it's strange. Turkey's a member of NATO. What's he going to be doing in Iran, meeting with Putin next week? And why is Putin meeting with a member of NATO like this? We're mentioning drones a lot, and Israel has had some success in some of the Iranian attempts to penetrate Israeli territory with drones that, say, the Saudis and others haven't had. So can you just speak for a moment about Israel's capabilities, that the contributions it can make to this regional air defense, and how far out does Israel's radar reach? I guess you've got satellites and everything. You got a lot of eyes all over the Middle East.
Yes, Israel has the most sophisticated and advanced air defense system in the entire world, not just in the Middle East. And yesterday, Biden, immediately after his landing, he was taken to an exhibition of all the systems that Israel has developed.
The
And
Arrow 3, David Sling, Iron Dome, and the new Iron Beam laser weapon.
The laser beam thing is the most important. I think one of the issues on the agenda today was getting the United States to help financing this system. It's supposed to be fully operational in about 2 years, but we don't have time. Israel Defense Minister Gantz said 2 days ago that Israel has been selling weapons to Sunni Arab countries worth no less than $3 billion. And these countries are very much interested in the Israeli defense systems, air defense systems. And I think this is going to be a major part in the discussion in the strategic conference in Jeddah. And simply because these countries are being attacked by Iranian forces, and need help and need defense. So and Israel is happy to share those defense systems with Arab countries against Iranian aggression. And I think in the next few months we will see that happen. I also think that Europe, NATO suddenly is waking up, and they also need those types of weapons. And so I think in the next year, maybe in the next 2 years, the Israeli military industry is going to get many orders, and this is good because you have to export. Israel is too small. It has to depend on exports of military hardware to other countries in order to fund its own production of military equipment. And this will also improve the military and security relations with members of the emerging Middle East Defense Alliance.
Let's just switch in the time that we have left with you to the whole Israeli-Palestinian peace track, which for me it seems that Biden, because he's so weak at home, the polls show historic lows in approval rating, high inflation, that he needs some easy wins. The Palestinian track is not ripe for any sort of real movement, but he is making some gestures to help mend some of the bruised feelings the Palestinians have after Trump sidelined them in many ways. And are you troubled by any of these gestures?
Not much. The Palestinians are completely marginalized in this trip. Biden said yesterday that the United States supports the two-state solution. This has been a standard American position for a long time, but he also added he does not see that realized soon. This was important. So tomorrow he's going to meet Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority in Bethlehem. The Palestinians were complaining that while he is spending 2 days in Israel, he only gave them about 1 hour and a half, but I don't think they deserve even that.
Yeah.
This is a small gesture. So tomorrow he will go to a hospital in Augusta, Victoria. The United States used to give this hospital $25 million a year. They support also other hospitals in Jerusalem. Some Israelis are a little bit concerned about it because this is the first time an American president go to East Jerusalem. But he wanted to reorder
without an Israeli official accompanying him. He's making a precedent.
Yes, but he wanted to open a consulate in Jerusalem for the Palestinians. This is ridiculous because this means simply undermining the transfer of the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Biden said, I'm not going to get back the embassy to Tel Aviv, but the United States does not have an embassy and a consulate in one city anywhere in the world. So he wanted to open that consulate as a political system, as a political statement. Israel said, yeah, you can, if you are concerned about consular services to the Palestinians, you can open the consulate in Ramallah. You can open it in even Abu Dis, which is a village next to Jerusalem. Why in Jerusalem itself? So this is a political statement. Israel said no. The Palestinians also wanted to place their own security forces on the border, on border stations between Israel and Jordan. Israel said no. So, and they were complaining all the time. They know only to complain. They don't do anything. They have missed many opportunities. They are so stupid, it's hard to believe, because they could have joined the Abraham Accords. Instead, they were fighting Trump. They were fighting the Abraham Accords. They are very angry at the Arab countries because the Abraham Accords broke a major tenet of the Palestinian strategy. There would be no normalization, no peace between Israel and the Arab countries before there is a peace with the Palestinians. The Sunni Arab countries decided that this is not, that the Palestinians no longer would be exercising a veto power on their own interests. So they are continuing. To struggle among themselves. You have the Palestinian Authority. You have Hamas. They cannot agree between themselves. How can they agree with Israel? So when I'm telling that Europeans, they don't even know what Hamas is all about. And also in the United States, they are too much. They fantasize too much about the real chances of getting peace between Israel and the Palestinians. It will take a long time, and I believe that it will happen, if at all, only if the Palestinians will conclude that there is no chance to overcome Israel, that there is no chance to eliminate Israel, and that they run the risk of being eliminated themselves, in the sense that I happen to believe that they have proven since the Oslo Accords that they are incapable of running a real state. The Palestinian Authority is a failed government. So the solution perhaps has to be found in some kind of an association with Jordan, where about 75% of the people are of Palestinian origins to begin with.
Yeah, that was the original the partition plan by the UN, is 2 states, but with an economic union or another, and the idea would be expanded to a confederation with Jordan, where it wasn't full autonomy. Look, I have one more question. I think the time you agreed to share with us is almost up, but I think for a lot of our Christian viewers here, this is an important question. When the Abraham Accords were first signed, the news broke. It was a big breakthrough, but there were rumors that there was some secret annex concerning Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. No Israeli official has ever been able to confirm that. None of the sources I talked to. But I always felt that if the Saudis really started opening up to Israel, opening ties and all, then there would have to be some sort of compromise. That would be the moment where Israel would have incentive to perhaps make a compromise on Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, in order to bring the Saudis into the circle of peace and reconciliation. Do you know, or are you aware of anything in that regard?
No, I'm not aware. But I can tell you that, that there is some competition among no less than 3 states about custody, so to speak, of the Temple Mount.
Yes.
It's the Palestinians,
yes.
It is Jordan, and it is Saudi Arabia. And even
and
from
Morocco
time to time,
also?
Yeah, Morocco was the chair of the Jerusalem conference, so to speak. But
In the Arab League. Yeah.
Yes, Saudi Arabia says that they have responsibility for all the holy places of Islam. So since Mecca and Medina are located in Saudi Arabia, they claim to be the custodian also of the temple of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's not really the Temple Mount. So Jordan has been given, I think it was a mistake by Israeli Minister of Defense at the time. Jordan was given role in the Temple Mount.
In the Israel-Jordan peace treaty.
Yeah, no, even before that, we can go to the period immediately after the 67 war. But I think that Israel is interested in having a Saudi role as well. And the idea here is to simply, first of all, to neutralize the Palestinians, who they think should be the sole guardian of the Temple Mount. So, and they are distributing all kinds of lies about Al-Aqsa in danger. They do it. Some extreme Israeli Arabs are doing it as well. So there might be here some kind of a joint interest, Saudi-Israeli interest, in giving Saudi Arabia some role. I don't know if it exists. Well, the Abraham Accords, Saudi was outside the Abraham Accords. But if there would be a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which I think is just a matter of time, it will take time, but it will happen because of all the advantages of that kind of an accord compared to not having it. That perhaps one article or one element there will address Saudi role in the Temple Mount, and I do not necessarily consider that to be a bad role.
Okay, it's an important issue to follow, and we just thank you for your time. Thank you again for joining us and for joining us so early in the morning there. And we're all going to be following as Biden winds up his trip here this evening. Right now, he's over watching the opening of the Maccabi games, all the Jewish athletes from around the world. It's a great time. And then he'll spend, like you say, part of the morning with the over at Augusta Victoria Hospital or Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem, and down in Bethlehem with Mahmoud Abbas before he flies off to Riyadh. A very important trip. We thank you for helping us understand this, and you are free to go, and we'll continue here. Thank you, Professor Gilboa.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this show. I must tell you that there were no surprises so far.
Yes.
And I don't think there are going to be. I would be very surprised if there are going to be surprises coming out from that trip. I think that this trip was postponed. It was supposed to have been to have occurred about a month ago, and I think the reason for that was that it was not yet ripe for coming here. So it's very well prepared. All the subjects are known in advance. Even the joint statements have been written in advance. I need to say that tomorrow, the only thing is that the Palestinians did not agree with Biden. They are not going to issue tomorrow a joint statement because they demanded from Biden to support a Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem. So there is no limit to their chutzpah, and the United States refused to do so. So they said, okay, we will. So there would be no joint statement. And I need also to say, the Palestinians hate the United States for all kinds of reasons, unjustifiably. The United States is giving them. Biden restored like $450 million to the Palestinian Authority, another $450 million to UNRWA, this corrupt refugee agency. And so they have nothing to complain about, but they are complaining all the time. They present themselves as victims all the time. And this works on the European Union, and it works also on some people in the United States. They have no idea what the real situation is. They don't even know that much of that money the United States gives to the Palestinian Authority goes to private pockets. All of the leaders are very rich people, and they go to convicted terrorists who get salaries from the Palestinian Authority in violation of an American law. Thank you very much, and I hope to be able to talk to you again sometime in the future.
Okay, yeah, Dennis Ross called it the politics of grievance, that you keep getting money because you keep complaining about all the wrongs done to you. But we really appreciate your time and all the best, and hope to have you on again. Thank you, Professor Eytan Gilboa from Bar-Ilan University, and right now lecturing at University of Southern California in Los Angeles. God bless you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to just sort of wind up over the next 10-15 minutes with a few more thoughts on the Biden visit. I think when we started out, I talked about how many expected Joe Biden, because he had been vice president under Barack Obama, that when he came into office, he was going to undo all that Trump had done, and not only domestically, but even in foreign policy, including the Middle East, and return to some of the Biden era policies in the region. Of course, Trump had been very pro-Israel. He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He recognized the Golan as sovereign Israeli territory. And he shuttered the PLO mission in Washington. He shut down this sort of independent US consulate on a Grand Street in West Jerusalem, not even East Jerusalem, that served as a diplomatic mission to the Palestinians. He cut off funding to the Palestinians. A lot of them, they had a lot of grievances against Trump. And so, you know, people expected Biden to bring a lot, to undo a lot Trump had done and go back to Obama-era policies. 18 months in, I'm a little surprised at it, but Biden has set something of a middle course. He is here trying to make some gestures towards the Palestinians, promise them we're going to open some sort of consulate for you, visiting Augusta Victoria in this symbolic visit without any Israeli officials accompanying. That's sort of breaking a taboo. Meeting with Abbas, the Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, down in Bethlehem. But we have to remember that the meeting's not taking place in Ramallah, and there's probably a reason for that, because if you visit Abbas in Ramallah as a foreign leader, you are expected to go pay homage at the grave of Yasser Arafat, lay a wreath, whatever, listen to their national anthem, whatever it is they do there. And Biden wanted to avoid those sort of optics in this visit. So he's meeting with him in Bethlehem, and that's kind of a slight in itself. So the Palestinians are not very happy about this. Biden is really reinforcing the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship, and it seems that he's embraced the Abraham Accords, even though it's so identified with Trump, and expanding, it's had a lot of economic investment, cultural exchange, diplomatic, a lot of those aspects of the Abraham Accords, but there's also this military aspect that is being revealed slowly by slowly what is developing. But Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz and confirmed by US officials, they have all been talking about some of the military expansion of the Abraham Accords, and also it tried to draw the Saudis into it, even to the point where there were reports saying that Israel was going to offer the Saudis this new laser-based Iron Beam. It's beyond the Iron Dome. This Iron Beam is a laser. It's a lot cheaper than Iron Dome to shoot down mortars. They've even been using it over recent months to shoot down some of these fire balloons and fire kites coming from Hamas in Gaza. And they're trying to improve it, make it stronger so it can hit aircraft, incoming cruise missiles, right down to rockets, shorter range rockets and mortars and drones, and without the expense, the extra expense of sending up counter rockets, trying to hit a bullet with a bullet. Here you're trying to hit a bullet with a beam of energy, electrical pulse that melts it, destroys it, sets it off, triggers it in midair. And this is quite a development that even the Saudis, who are getting hit from Yemen by Iranian rockets that they're supplying to their proxy Houthi militia there, that have been hitting Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is very vulnerable to it. And you had this a couple of years ago in the eastern oil fields in Saudi Arabia, a coordinated strike of a drone swarm that showed up of munitions that were, self-armed. They attacked the oil facilities there. At the same time, some cruise missiles struck and did a lot of damage. And I think this is part of what is driving the Saudis towards Israel, because Israel has these cutting-edge technologies that they've been developing for decades. The whole Arrow 3, it's now beyond Arrow 2 to Arrow 3, which I think there's a lot of proof that it's more effective than the US Patriot 3 anti-missile defense system to shoot down long-range missiles. The David Sling, which is intermediate, and then the more short range is Iron Dome, and now this Iron Beam. We don't know exactly how much range it has. If it gets more funding to develop it further, it could hit all sorts and supplement it. The radar systems that go with all these are really advanced. They're better than even what the Americans have in some ways, the Green Pine radar and such. And to offer this and integrate it into a Middle East defense shield, a whole grid or network to be prepared for any Iranian drone attack, missile attack, rockets, any threat coming from any direction from this alliance. It really shows that Biden is embracing this momentum and building on the momentum of the Abraham Accords. That's something of a surprise after Obama shunned them so much. I think that Obama was a bit of an ideologue. I wrote in the Jerusalem Post a couple years ago about how, because Obama grew up with a Muslim father and then a Muslim stepfather, he had a lot more benign view or benevolent view of Islam as a religion, and he sort of had this dream of reconcile that historic bitter schism between Sunni and Shia Islam through Iran and a nuclear deal with them, and through the Muslim Brotherhood, who he helped empower in Egypt to overthrow Mubarak. Obama did this. But Joe Biden is not quite the ideologue. He doesn't quite have such rose glasses towards Islam. He's been in the Senate a long time in Washington. He was a Cold Warrior. He sees Russia now rising again to sort of reestablish its empire that it had in Soviet times or back before World War I, the Russian Empire then. And he's decided to befriend once again the regional Arab powers, especially the Saudis, even though just in his election campaign, he called Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman a pariah, that he wouldn't meet with him. He was ostracized, and yet he's going to meet with him. He needs him to get an increase in oil and because of the sanctions against Russia over the Ukraine conflict, and he needs him to help stand up and create this regional air defense shield against the Iranian conventional threat. as part of dealing with the Iranian nuclear threat. And whether this helps, this is going to help drive this forging alliance of Israel and all these regional Arab powers. It's going to maybe draw Iran back to the negotiating table, make some compromises to protect its nuclear program. We'll have to see. That's something that's going to play out over coming weeks. But some of the rhetoric and some of the decisions and actions of recent weeks and during the visit so far, Biden has assured he would use military force as a last resort. But I think he's helping, it's very clear he's helping Israel and these other Arab powers prepare to meet the Iranian challenge on their own as best they can before any American intervention is needed, and that's good. And then on the Palestinian front, Obama was really bullying Israel to cave in to creation of a Palestinian state. If you remember, as the Obama administration was leaving, they were really bitter, especially towards Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the time, that he hadn't caved to their pressure. And John Kerry, Secretary of State at the time, had that really embittered speech in his farewell at the US State Department, and the whole decision to allow passage in the UN Security Council of a very tough resolution against Israel, declaring all the areas of the in the disputed territories as occupied Palestinian territory. If that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to negotiate. It all belongs to the Palestinians. John Kerry is in the current Biden administration. Biden was vice president when Obama made those decisions. Here you have some members, I think, of Biden's administration who want to be tougher on Israel, but he recognizes, he and his team, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, they realize, look, the Abraham Accords are a success. They're bearing good fruit for the region, for stability, for America, for the world, for the free flow of oil in so many ways that they've embraced them. And the Palestinian cause is sort of getting a second shift. It's been relegated to a back burner, and the Palestinians are not so happy about it. They're getting a couple gestures here, but again, they're kind of hollow. This visit to this Augusta Victoria Hospital on the Mount of Olives, the U.S. has helped fund it. The Germans built it over a century ago. It treats a lot of people. It's kind of benign for a president to visit a hospital. And his wife, Jill Biden, has had a connection to that hospital for, I believe, more than a decade now. So I'm not so concerned that he's visiting it without any Israeli officials. It's a symbolic gesture to the Palestinians, but I think it'll be easily forgotten. The fact that he's in meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader in Bethlehem, and not Ramallah, not wanting to, have this photo op at the grave of Yasser Arafat. That's an important move there. And this whole thing of a U.S. consulate to reopening a separate U.S. mission or consulate to the Palestinian Authority somewhere in Jerusalem. It's not quite a done deal yet, and the Palestinians are really shooting themselves in the foot so many times with their maximalist demands, even in this atmosphere. And really, the message from these Arab countries, including the Saudis now, is if the Palestinians do not get to a point of genuinely wanting to make peace with Israel, history is going to pass them by. And it doesn't mean that the whole Palestinian cause is now dormant or whatever. Sometimes they will resort to violence, and who knows what would happen in that case. We hope it doesn't happen in any sort of large scale, and we pray for protection of Israel. But again, I'm a little surprised that that Biden isn't pushing Israel more. But again, Israel itself is in an election season. Normally, a U.S. president wouldn't visit at this time, so that he wouldn't tip the scales one way or the other. We don't know if his visit and meetings with Yair Lapid as caretaker prime minister are going to help in the upcoming elections. He also is meeting with, he's met with Benjamin Netanyahu as well to sort of bring some balance to it. Netanyahu's still the opposition leader here. But Israel just does not have a government with a mandate to govern. That's been the case for 3.5 years now, with a clear mandate from the people, and much less a government with a mandate to make major concessions to the Palestinians. So Biden and his team have recognized the Palestinian track is simply not ripe for any real movement right now. They're not pressuring Israel. They've come to strengthen Israel against the Iranian threat by helping to open doors, helping to build this military air defense, military alliance with some of these Abraham Accord countries, which of course also include Egypt and Jordan. They had original peace treaties with Israel, but they were sort of cold peace. That is warming up more. And so overall, I think there are good things coming out of this visit for Israel, and even for my country, America, even though I have many disagreements with Biden on many, many other issues. These are all things to pray about, all things to keep monitoring. We prayed about it in yesterday's global prayer gathering about, it seems there's a temptation, if the Saudis are coming in to some sort of peace agreement, reconciliation with Israel, opening ties, normalizing ties, that's probably a moment if Israel ever had some incentive or reason to really make a compromise on Jerusalem, and particularly the Temple Mount, this might be the time where some outside influence might try to force that. If you see the European Union finally getting involved here and that, or Vatican or whatever, that should be concerning. But so far, we haven't had anything confirmed about some sort of compromise on Jerusalem and the Temple Mount by Israel, but it is something to keep watching. We're going to end it there with today's webinar on the Biden visit. We thank you for joining us on the ICEJ weekly webinar today. We're going to be here next week on Thursday at 4 p.m. Israel time, same time, with another webinar. We'll still to decide the topic and the guests, but please join us then. We have the global prayer gathering next Wednesday, 4 p.m. Israel time. Please join us then as we join hundreds of Christians from all over the world praying for Israel, the Middle East, for revival in your own country. And of course, I can't leave here without mentioning the upcoming Feast of Tabernacles. You want to join us here in Israel, the land of promise, Jerusalem. Come show your solidarity with Israel. Come celebrate and worship Jesus with believers from all over the world after 2 years of not being able to come. It is time to come up and ascend to Jerusalem to worship the King here, October 9 through 16 here in Jerusalem. Help us by coming and lifting your voice to worship the Lord here in Jerusalem. God bless you from Zion. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next Thursday at 4 p.m. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on our social media pages for more exclusive ICEJ content.
Did you know that 2,000 years ago, a very significant ceremony of the Feast of Tabernacles was taking place right here? We are here at the Pool of Siloam, and tradition says that priests would come down to that very place and they would fill their pitchers of waters and take them the steep ascent all the way up to the Temple Mount. When they were coming here, they would not come alone, but they would be accompanied by many Levites and worshippers that would sing songs of praise to glorify God. And their arrival here and their departure up to the Temple Mount was perfectly and precisely timed. They would arrive up there on the Temple Mount at exactly the time when the morning sacrifice would be brought before the Lord, and they would empty their pitchers at the altar, and they would bring forth this water libation ceremony before the Lord. The rabbis say the significance of this ceremony cannot be overestimated, because it was resembling the expectation of the rain that is so much needed here in this land, and as they were just entering into the rainy season after the Feast of Tabernacles. But they also said, one of the Talmudic resources, they say that it also resembles the expectation of the infilling of the Holy Spirit, referencing Isaiah 12, where they say, we will come and with shouts of joy, we will draw water out of the wells of salvation. And it's exactly to this ceremony that Jesus was referencing when he was speaking in John chapter 7, where he says, whoever is thirsty, let them come to me, and out of his innermost being streams of living water will flow. And John says he was speaking and referring about the Holy Spirit that would be poured out. I'm reminded on the passage from Isaiah chapter 44, where we read, I will pour out water on a thirsty land, streams on a dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon your offspring and my blessing upon your descendants. Maybe you are living in a dry and thirsty land yourself. Maybe your nation needs a fresh touch from God, a fresh revival. Maybe you personally feel you are dry and exhausted, and you feel like this dry desert land and you need a fresh touch from God. I want to personally invite you to join us this year at the Feast of Tabernacles right here in Jerusalem, and expect a fresh infilling of the Holy Spirit. God promises that whoever is asking him, he will fill them with his Holy Spirit, and what a better place to experience it than here in Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles. I look forward seeing you at the Feast of Tabernacles 2022 right here in Jerusalem for a fresh infilling of the Holy Spirit.